Jason, I'm going to begin, and I'll ask all of you to jump in and add your thoughts on this, and I think that this will really get us going. A question that I've asked you each of the times that you've been on this stage. One of the first times you were here, you said that AI is about 15 years away from being sentient. Mm-hmm. And I asked you last year, and you said 14 years. So are we now 13 years, or are we still, because where you began was, it seemed like we really don't have AI, probably at least the AI that we're, as nerds and science fiction fans, think of when we think about AI. But where do we stand? Do you, one, still believe AI will become sentient at some point? And are we anywhere near that?
Yeah, so I still believe it, and no, we're not anywhere near it. I'd say 13 years is probably a good guess this year.
So you agree with yourself from the last couple of years?
I still agree with myself.
Yeah.
I think when we look at we're not going to get to AGI, artificial general intelligence, through the systems, tools, and technologies that we have today. It's going to require advancements through AI itself is a combinatorial innovation, and we're going to require other technologies to help us get to that sentience. When we see innovations like we recently saw Microsoft create a new state of matter, for their quantum. When we see advances in computational biology and biological computing, those are the types of technologies which, although are not AI, are directly related to AI to help us get to that kind of leapfrog event where we can get to a kind of consciousness, with AI. So the short answer is we can't get there with the avenues that we're pursuing today, and we're still a long way away from where we need to be with those things. To some of the other panelists' points, we have very good systems around language, and we have really good systems around creating a sense of intimacy and a sense of sharing. Harvard Business Review earlier this month published their latest update for 2025 in terms of the primary uses for generative AI, and the number one use is around having kind of a companion. And it's someone to talk to, which I think, for me and hopefully for other people, you might have found that surprising, that it's not about writing copy or helping you generate images, but it's around having this connection. And I think that that's very troubling, especially when we're talking about consciousness.
Malek, your thoughts? Do you agree with Jason? Disagree? Any additional thoughts to add?
It's hard to agree or disagree without defining what is consciousness, right, or sentience. And I think we have not even defined that. I think one thing that is different, that makes us different from AI, uniquely different, is that our consciousness evolves and is physically embedded and evolves over time, right, versus the AI that we're developing today. Even though it may seem like it has an understanding, it has acquired all of the knowledge that we as humans have produced, it has limited memory, right? And when it's interacting with us, it also has interacts within a context window, so that memory is limited. So I don't see its consciousness. I don't see it as conscious unless we get it to a point where it has enough memory that it basically develops experiences and accumulates experiences like we do as humans. So over 60 or 70 years, and we're not at that point today. Mm-hmm.
So let me just, did I hear you say over 60 or 70 years?
Yeah, or 80 years, whatever the average lifetime expectancy is.
Okay, so that wasn't, when I first heard that, you're not saying it won't be sentient for 60, 70. What you're talking about is our brain capacity. Until we get to the point where we have maybe dementia or Alzheimer's or something, right, we remember vast amounts of everything that's happened from maybe this age of 2 on or something
exactly.
Like that. Okay.
So at the very least, right, so that we can say, this AI has consciousness that is equivalent or similar to what we see in human beings. Mm-hmm. And that's just one minimum condition, right? Mm-hmm. There are other conditions. So I would say, I don't know if 13 years is the right answer, but I would definitely not that close to that point.
Okay, Dustin, agree, disagree, anything to add there?
You know, being a data guy, I always like to follow the data. And actually, an interesting article came across my newsfeed this morning. It had a picture of Sam Altman, and it, basically said that, Open AI is spending millions, tens of millions of dollars just on the words "thank you" and "please," right? So people are being kind to the LLMs, thinking that sometime in the future it might hunt them down, right? So I think the general consensus is that humanity believes that it's going to be sentient at some point soon. So I'll have to kind of follow the data point there and just say, yeah, I think we're probably going to reach that point. I would say somewhere between 10 and 20 years.
Okay. So let me go back to where you were saying Sam Altman said they're spending all kinds of money on please and thank, like processing power, dealing with us putting that in.
Correct. So in the prompt, when the LLM provides you a response, being kind back to the LLM, saying thank you, it's like, as weird as it is, if you're thinking from a psychological perspective, people are starting to believe that this thing they're talking to is somewhat human, right? Mm-hmm. It's somewhat sentient, and even if they don't see it, they're not looking at a face. And I think robotics and all these things will come together to start looking more human in general in the future when all the different platforms come together. But right now, you're already starting to see our behavior indicate that we believe sentience is coming.
Mm-hmm. So Dina, what do you think? And obviously I realize you have to be careful because you represent people in this space, so you can't share things that are private and need to remain private. But what are you seeing that has you lean one way or the other?
So, my personal opinion that it's not there yet, but at the same time, the more data you start putting into these models, right, and the faster the processing power becomes, it would seem like it is sentient. And I can also, imagine fairly easily where a person interacting with the machine or with a chatbot would think that it is sentient and it does have feelings. But going to what Dustin said, somebody pointed out to me also the amount of processing power that's being set on please and thank you. And I stopped doing that at some point. And at the same time, the output that I'm getting is the same. It's not any less accurate without please and thank you than with it.
For now.
For now.
Right? Yeah. We've all probably seen the memes where, the robots rise and the robot's going after this one guy and the other robot says, he always said thank you. Leave him alone. So there's a lot there. Let me also back up and ask, this question. For the longest time, I always thought, and to some extent I still do think this way, that the best working definition for, well, maybe even before I ask that question, let's take a step back and say, what are we talking about when we're talking about AI? Because there's like the old school AI, then there's generative AI, and help us understand the difference. Do I have somebody who wants to dive into that to kind of define or explain the different flavors of AI?
Sure.
Malek?
Yeah, so there's the symbolic AI, that's the initial AI, right, where we tell or we share with the computer a model of the world, right, a model of how to think about the world. And then there is machine learning, where algorithms now are learning through examples, through data, learning on their own, right, and extracting insights from the data. And we use that, we call that typically predictive AI, right? So with those examples that the model is learning, it's able to predict things about data that looks similar. Mm-hmm. And then there is, under machine learning, there's deep learning, which is a new class of algorithms that we use also for prediction, but also now we can use it for generating new data. And then there's the new class underneath deep learning. There is generative AI. This is, the latest type of AI that most people, think of when they're talking about AI. And that's models that are neural networks that are used to generate data. Now, instead of predicting outcomes, now they're generating data, whether it's text or whether it's images or videos. So that's at a high level.
Okay,
There's
is there
different types of AI.
anything to add? Dustin, I see you shaking your head. Do you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I feel like that was, we're at a place where, AI is literally generating more data, right? that is getting fed back into itself, right? And I think that's an interesting place to think about. It's like we're no longer talking about an AI that's just pulling from scraping the open internet and all of history. Now we're talking about AI that's also pulling from data that it's literally generating itself. So it's training its own self with net new data.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, the only other thing I'd add is that we have this agentful environment now where AI can act independently. So it can go off and do things maybe without you asking explicitly, or based on its understanding of the model of the world. It can take on tasks and then using generative AI, complete these tasks and produce new things.
Okay. Dina, anything to add there?
Well, the only thing I can add is when ChatGPT came out, people were saying, well, LLMs are not new. And the way they process and generate data and then feed back into the models, there is something new there. And and one reason I know that is when initially OpenAI was not filing any patent applications at all. And then a year or two ago, all of a sudden, they started filing a lot under Track 1, and you see those applications published. So even though the mantra was LLMs are not new and everything's known, then obviously it's not the case. So there is some novelty that's going on.
Okay. So where I wanted to go before I kind of circle back to that particular question is so we kind of get an idea of what the AIs are is I've always thought for a long time that really the best definition, I think it still probably is currently, particularly listening to you guys talk about where we're at today, is the Alan Turing definition, which really is just the computer operates so fast that it appears as if it's exhibiting intelligence. Is that still, in your mind, a good definition, or are we beyond that and there's some other thing going on than just a really fast computer that can spit information back out?
So
go ahead, Jason.
If you want to do something fun, I just demonstrated this to Dustin a little while ago. This is a fun thought exercise. So if any or all of you have access to ChatGPT, using the 4.0 model, for example, go ahead and ask it to show you a clock and then pick a time of the day, any time of the day, to have it show you the time on that clock, on the hands of that clock. And it's not going to be able to show you anything but 10 after 10. And the reason is that the training data for clocks, it always shows you 10 after 10, because in all of the marketing material and advertisements, when you put the hands of a clock at 10 after 10, the brand for the clock, whether it's a Rolex or a Patek Philippe or a Timex, sits right in that spot. And so the AI is only seeing that. It understands the world that way. So you can ask it to show you 8:15 or 3:30 or 2:45, but it's only going to show you 10:10. And it's very hard for me to reconcile this enormously powerful multi-billion-dollar capability when it doesn't know what time it is, right? And it doesn't know what time means, right? Because we have artificial inference. We don't have artificial intelligence. And to the point we were making before around consciousness, there's no intersubjectivity. So the notion of a time of day doesn't exist within these frameworks. So I think it's kind of a very, very simple exercise, very simple thought exercise, but a very powerful one in trying to help determine it doesn't matter how fast these systems are.
Okay, so let me take it another step back then. So the IBM computers that first started beating the chess world world masters, grandmasters, like Deep Blue, for example. That was just a really super fast computer that could go through millions of calculations very, very quickly and pick the right move based on the board.
For very narrow subject matter.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like what you're talking about with AI is that's not, because I think a lot of people think that that's sort of the AI has grown from that, and now it's a for all subject matters it can do that sort of thing.
That's correct.
And that's not what I'm hearing.
It does not do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dustin?
I mean, I think too, you're kind of getting into a place of the nuance that makes us human, right? Will AI ever reach a place, like in sentient state, right, that it can understand, that it can create and feel, and feel sad, for instance, right? Can AI actually feel sad, or is it programmed to feel sad? And it tells you it's sad simply because it was programmed to tell you that it's sad. Some of that kind of gets into honestly a personal, probably faith-based area, in the soul. I personally don't believe AI will ever reach a place where it can actually literally feel, right? It will perceive feeling, and it will tell you in a way that might feel right. But I believe at the end of the day, it's still a program.
So is it like the feelings of like, and not to be too glib with this, but like the feelings of like a psychopath, like somebody who knows that at this moment in time I'm supposed to be sad, or at this moment in time I'm supposed to be happy, or at this moment in time I can sense that you are happy, so I should be happy for you, and because that's sort of what psychopathy is, I think.
Right. I was actually talking to Jason over lunch, and I believe, like, if you think about like who's going to be one of the most vulnerable people groups of AI, and it's the narcissist. If you think about a narcissist that is constantly needing to, like, have an endless void in their heart, right, that needs to be fed and be told that you are amazing. Well, AI is an endless machine that will continue to tell you you're amazing, right? So imagine the constant feedback loop. Now, is that the right thing for AI to tell the narcissist? Doesn't the actual narcissist need to be told, hey, this might not be healthy? You need to sometimes have correction. And I think that echo chamber, that's what we're talking about. It's like the program is going to tell you what you want to hear potentially, because it was trained to do that. But I'm not so sure that that's what humanity actually needs. Like it's going to be able to feel that nuance, right?
Go ahead, Malek.
To add, so I've always understood Alan Turing's test as the test to, for a machine, can we as humans distinguish whether this output came from a machine or is an output by a human being, right? Mm-hmm. And so speed is one factor, but more importantly, accuracy is another one.
And that's right where I always wanted to lead us. So go down that path, if you will, please.
Yeah. And so at this point, we certainly see AI models that can, outpace human beings in terms of speed and in terms of accuracy when performing certain tasks. I think in terms of text, the benchmarks that have been performed, they say that for most writing tasks, AI outperforms 98% of people, right? So they are really up there when it comes to those types of tasks. But certainly on other tasks, they're still underperforming, and we're able to distinguish whether some outputs are produced by AI models or not. Mm-hmm. So I think, to answer your question, the test still holds as one way of defining whether.
So the Turing test
it's
still relevant today.
Right.
Okay. Because you all know that a lot of people don't think it is relevant today, and I think they're wrong. Let's go a little bit further down the path with respect to accuracy. Over the last several years, when we've had this conversation, one of the things that we've had conversations about are hallucinations. Now, I don't think that they're completely gone, but I think that they're different, right? It's gotten better in a lot of respects. Is that fair to say, or am I being too generous? Jason?
It depends, right? So it has gotten better, right, generally. But I think also what's gotten better is its nuance around language and helping to find better ways of articulating the gaps, filling the gaps that it doesn't have. So the corpus of data has gotten better, and the synthetic data that it generates to retrain itself, I think it's become recursive in knowing where the hallucinations were occurring to help self-correct there. But I still believe there's significant issues.
Okay. Malek, what say you?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it depends. It depends on the use case and the application and the model being used. It depends on how it's being used. Are you using, retrieval augmented generation, for instance, to improve, to direct the AI model to use or to reference data within the corpus that you're providing, or are you allowing it to just generate any answers that it wants, right? And also, it depends on the sector. So, for instance, in legal, in the legal sector, the models that have been trained are still generating lots of hallucinations. And a study by Stanford has shown that depending on the model, the hallucinations range between 48 to 60%. So
40 to
48,
60?
yeah.
Oh, are hallucinations?
Hallucinations, yeah.
So it's not even 50-50.
No. It's
So Dina, why do you suppose that? I mean, I'll give you why I think that might be within the legal. Everybody seems to think that they can do law. Being a lawyer, it's not that difficult. I can figure it out. When you're your own lawyer, even if you are a lawyer, it's a mistake. But when you're just an average person, there are all kinds of potholes and pitfalls that you walk into as traps. Do you suppose that that's why AI is having such a hard time with this?
I mean, it may be in part. I also think that if you're using ChatGPT and similar types of models that have not been trained on legal data, right, it doesn't have the training corpus to come out with the right answer. At the same time, because of the usability, those models are trained or programmed, and Jason can correct me, to come out with an answer, because we don't want to hear that the model doesn't know something. So in this instance, the model comes out with an answer, which could be, like in Meta versus Avianca, a docket number from a different case, or a citation from a different case. So it would give you an answer that is not necessarily a correct answer.
I think it's really important to remember that commercial LLM models, whether it's coming from Meta or Google or OpenAI, whoever is developing them, they've been designed with the intent to persuade. So whatever answer they're giving to you, it wants to be convinced, and it also wants to delight the client, right? And so you're the client for all the input there. And to Dustin's point, I mean, if you're mentally ill and you're asking its questions, it has no intersubjectivity. It's not a trained therapist. Even if it's a RAG model, and that RAG model's been trained on peer-reviewed data around a disease state, it's still designed to want to please you.
Yeah, I think just one thing to remember with all these models, and going to the legal context, is the same thing as if you're working with a junior associate, right? Everyone makes mistakes. It's on you to realize that there is a mistake and to correct it. Right? Just because you're working with a computer as opposed to a human being doesn't mean that the ultimate answer would be correct. And it's on you as an experienced attorney or practitioner to realize that.
Yeah. Also, I think what's different in the legal context from other applications is the lack of benchmarking data, right? And so, we've seen reasoning models being developed to be able to resolve mathematical problems, and we can verify whether the answer that the model came up with is accurate or not because we have that data and we know the answer, right? It's just one answer. Versus in a legal context, we're dealing with, for the most part, opinions, right, by lawyers or judges, and so we cannot verify whether something, an output, is 100% correct or not. and that has an impact on the models and their accuracy.
So one of the things that I've thought about AI in the legal context specifically, that's I think very different than it is in at least any other context I can think of, is so much about what we do relates to persuasion. You know, there are like when like for example, AI I think does pretty well, better than human doctors by and large, identifying cancers, for example, based on all the data, because it has access to everything that is available. Having access to everything that is available does not help you necessarily in the law, because often that just means that you have arguments and I have arguments, and there's nothing right on point down the middle. And as long as you're in an area where persuasion is important, I think AI is going to really struggle. And I do. So this obviously, I think there's things in the law that AI could do, like writing a basic will, writing a basic landlord-tenant agreement, you know, those kinds of things where it's not based on persuasion, it's based on, well, you need to have this clause, this clause, this clause, this clause. Did you forget your children? How much do you want to give them? You know, you live in a state where even if you write your kids out, they're going to get something, or you can't write your wife out, or, you know, whatever it may be. Those kinds of forks in the road decision-making, either A or B, I think AI is going to be really good at. But the gray stuff, maybe eventually, I don't think during my lifetime, but maybe it'll eventually get good at the gray area. But am I mistaken, or you agree, disagree?
Parking sentience and consciousness, right? If it's a standard and repeatable process, it's great at this, right? These machines remix data, full stop. That's all they do. Human beings interpret meaning. And that definition, like, is really kind of the main thing. So when these systems can interpret meaning, then it's going to get really interesting. But we're 13 years away from that.
Yeah, Gene, I would say too,
Dustin.
like in that same lines of persuasion, like I'm a musician, and so in creating something that, you know, is emotive, right, in general, I think AI right now in its current forms, like I downloaded a program that has a generative vocal. I'm a guitarist, right? I play music, so I need help when it comes to the singing part. So I'll put in MIDI, and it'll go in, and generative, you know, voices will come in and kind of try to do that for me. And I mean, it's hysterical what it'll come out with sometimes. It's somewhere around the ballpark, but it's never what I would release out in the open. Right. In the same way of a persuasive argument and legal, like it's just, I feel like part of that is kind of goes down the same path of prompting. How good are you at giving it specifically what you're wanting out of it? And you have to provide an incredible amount of detail. And once you start, the closer you get to the creative side and away from like the, you know, more mathematical process-oriented task.
But there's also finesse in there too, right?
Right.
So you have to understand the machine that you're prompting, because if you are too literal, it'll seize up and not be able to action that. So there's a little bit of artistry.
Yeah, we had an example, like everybody's coming up with their own little toy figure, you know, action figures, and with your accessories, and you ask AI, show me what I would look like as a toy, you know, sitting on the shelf at Walmart with my accessories, and you know, Jay sent his, and I was like, hey man, what did you prompt, man, to get that? That was amazing. It hit you spot on. I put the same thing in, and mine looked absolutely hallucinated everywhere, because I was putting in brand names. Like if you don't, I put in Patron. I didn't put in, you know,
luxury tequila,
yeah. Right? And it takes those. How you prompt it matters, and I think eventually maybe it starts to figure that out and starts to try to translate. But how can it truly get in your head unless, you know, there's telepathy, right? Or
brain computer interface.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, I just had an epiphany here listening to your answer talking to me about music. I don't think it's ever going to be able to do this. I don't think we ever have anything to worry about, like ever. And the reason is so some of you know, at the beginning of my career, legal career, one of the things I was going to get rich in the .com era as involved in an independent record label. So I was co-owner of an independent record label. So I had occasion to work with some musicians that were good, some that were very good, and some that were just outstanding, like ridiculous. We had worked for a little while with a group of, they were called Funktown, and it was the drummer from Billy Joel, it was the saxophone player from Hall & Oates, and it was, like all that kind of, the background people, like real professionals. And I get tingles just thinking about it. And they played, we were backstage one night, and they played, and this was the day we were working with them, and they come off, and I'm like, well, how long have you guys rehearsed? And he said, this is only the second time we played together. And it was just like, they all stopped on a dime. There was no bleed. They were real professionals. And watching this guy play drums was like watching Animal from the Muppets. I mean, he was like going to town, So you can play, and there's a difference between playing notes and playing music.
Absolutely.
I mean, a gigantic, and you all probably have had that experience, right? I mean, people technically, you listen to something, it's like, oh, that's good. And then you listen to somebody who's got real skill, and that's different. And that seems to be what we're talking about here with AI. They may be able to play the notes, but is it going to be able to feel? So like the experience I just had retelling this story, I literally got chills when I think of that. And that's what I think music and art should bring about, is emotion. AI is never going to have chills when they hear music or when they talk about it. And so I just had, that was just a moment where I'm like, okay, it's never going to be sentient. Not the way that we feel sentient.
No.
Maybe it'll be sentient like Data from Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
Who realizes it has limitations but can't go that extra mile to do any more than play the note. Am I crazy? Am I romanticizing this too much, you think, Jason?
No, I think you're dead on.
Okay.
I think that's right.
So does anybody have any questions? So the question is about whether it matters whether AI can reflect on itself if it's conscious?
I think it depends on the utility, right? So if you're looking for artificial general intelligence, I think it matters a lot. Because if you unleash something into the world that portends to have some sort of consciousness, but without the ability to self-reflect, then you start to very quickly diverge into that sociopathic category, and not a whole lot of great stuff is going to happen from that, right? And as we abdicate more and more control to these systems, and it starts even now, right? And I think it's in an abhorrent state, in terms of its ability to create things, not just music. As we start to understand that it's originating ideas. When you start to move more into the territory that you're describing, I think it matters a lot.
Also, I think so. It's self-reflection and self-consciousness, right? When it gets to that point, then it reaches a point where it wants to preserve itself, and potentially, through any means. And when it reaches that point, it may start, shutting down other systems, AI, autonomous systems, or doing other things that may that may impact us as humans. So the self-consciousness piece becomes dangerous if they act autonomously.
If we get there, we have to restrict its memory. It cannot have persistent memory if we get to the point that you're describing. Otherwise, it becomes an existential threat.